Hey, what's up you guys? This is Haley here from Should You Buy It, and today we're going to be talking about my pregnancy week, not really week by week, but like appointment by appointment, because it varies throughout your entire pregnancy. So if you guys are liking these kind of videos, make sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below suggesting what you want my next video to be, and I might actually do it. But yeah, let's just jump in on this. So I learned I was pregnant at about 3 weeks of gestation, and that's actually super early to learn you're pregnant. I learned I was pregnant because of symptoms, and Ethan and I were trying to get pregnant. So we were actually watching out for the symptoms of, being pregnant. So I ended up learning I was pregnant at 3.5 weeks. Of course, I had a wedding 2 weeks after that, and then I had a honeymoon. And so then I wasn't actually able to get into an OB until 8 weeks, which actually ended up being pretty good. And a lot of people don't even know they're pregnant at 8 weeks. So 8 weeks was my first appointment with my OB. I highly suggest you find an OB that you like a lot, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them, and it's going to be pretty intimate time with them. So find an OB you like, find one that has the same sense of humor as you, and find one that actually has, morals isn't the right word, has the same mindset as you. So if you are anti-vaccine, I suggest you find an OB that is very similar to that. It might be really hard to find one like that, but I suggest you do that. So I ended up getting my OB through a, not a referral, through a suggestion. Somebody had used them before and they really liked them. And that person had the same humor as I did. So I thought, hey, it'll probably work out really well. So I ended up going to him at 8 weeks gestation was my first appointment. At the first appointment, they did do a vaginal ultrasound, which if I didn't even know they did that. Like that was even a thing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an ultrasound, but instead of going through your stomach, they actually go through your vagina. It's pretty much a stick, and they kind of shove it up there, and that's how they do the ultrasound at that early gestation. They also check your ovaries that way to make sure they are okay, especially if you've never had them checked before. I've never had any problems, so I've never had to get an ultrasound for my ovaries. But with the vaginal ultrasound, they're actually able to see a lot more that early on. So these are my ultrasound pictures from 8 weeks. I did get a 3D one. He looks like a squished gummy bear. I know it wants to focus on my face. So he looks like a squished gummy bear. We called him the melted gummy bear that got left in the car for too long. So that was 8 weeks, and then these are 8 weeks as well with his heartbeat. So we got to see him very early. It was very exciting. And that's how, since I was farther along and I had taken multiple tests and all that, that's how they confirmed my pregnancy. So if I would have been sooner, they probably would have done a blood test, but because I was farther along and they could see him at that point, then that's how they did it. At this 8-week appointment as well, they did do a blood draw, but I will say about halfway through the blood draw, we ended up collapsing my vein. So they couldn't get enough blood for all the tests they needed to do, which the tests, sorry, I'm looking for a binky. I just had it. So the blood that they did draw for the test was for genetic testing, which is just, the first one is very basic, and then depending on how that test goes, they will do more tests if they believe something might be genetically wrong. So that was my 8-week appointment, and then starting out from the beginning, you go every 4 weeks. So then I went at 12 weeks gestation. That's when they started doing protein tests through your urine, which you pretty much pee in a cup, and they double check that you're not passing protein through your urine. I have to write everything down because it was so weird. It was so confusing. They did the rest of the blood draw from the week before, which ended up being a lot better. They do your weight and they do your blood pressure. So they ask you what you weighed before your pregnancy, and then they kind of start from there. Which weight is, it was weird with me. So 12 weeks, you know, it was just a regular appointment to make sure blood pressure is fine and that if you had any questions or anything. 16 weeks is pretty much the exact same thing as 12 weeks. They do the protein test, they check your blood pressure, they check your weight, and that's pretty much it. And hi, say we found a binky. So 16 weeks was exactly like 12 weeks. And then 20 weeks hits, which in the beginning, the first 20 weeks are the longest time of your life. And then the last 20 weeks go by like that. Actually, the last like 6 weeks for me went by like that. So 20 weeks, typically, they do an anatomy ultrasound. That is when they measure baby, pretty much measure every single part of the baby to make sure baby is growing correctly. That's when they can also make sure, or they can see signs of like spina bifida or anything else they can kind of see through this ultrasound. Because baby is big enough to see through the ultrasound and measure, but not too big to where you can't measure anything. And it got complicated at ultrasounds later in my pregnancy because baby was so squished in there they couldn't measure things very well. So 20 weeks, they do, of course, the P test. They do that every single week no matter what. And then they weigh you, they check your blood pressure, and then you do your anatomy ultrasound. You can do your anatomy ultrasound as early as 16 weeks, but my doctor liked to do everything on the later part of the test. So, of course, you're still at your 4 weeks. So at 24 weeks, they do pretty much everything the same. So they do the urine test, they check your blood pressure, your weight. That's pretty much done at every single appointment, no matter what. And then the new thing they do starting at 24 weeks is, hi, you just stretching, is they measure your stomach / your uterus. So this is when most people are starting to show by now. And what they do is they have you lay on the table and they measure pretty much from the top of your uterus down to the bottom. And how that should measure with a tape measure is the amount of weeks you should be in centimeters. So if you're 24 weeks, you should be measuring around 24 centimeters. A lot of women can measure ahead or behind, but that doesn't really mean anything right now because a lot of times by the end of your pregnancy, it will correct itself. So I was measuring pretty much right on time. 28 weeks is when I did my glucose testing, which if you don't know what that is when they give you a really, really sugary drink and then they take blood an hour later and they see how well your body is processing sugar. If your body is not processing sugar very well, they will do a 3-hour test, kind of the same way, except you just wait 3 hours instead of 1. And then if your blood sugar is too high through your blood after your 3 hour, then that means that you have gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is pretty much when you become diabetic because you're pregnant, and it goes away pretty much the second you give birth. This means you do have to do everything a diabetic does. You have to watch what you eat, you have to make sure your blood sugar is correct, and all this other jazz. I fortunately did not have it. That was the one test I was actually very, very scared of was I would have gestational diabetes because I don't react to sugar very well. If I have too much sugar, I get really sick. And then if I have too less sugar, then I get really sick as well. So I kind of have to keep it balanced very well. And that's just mostly with eating very often. If I accidentally skip a meal, especially when I was pregnant, I would get super, super sick and like vomiting. But so at 34 weeks I did that, or sorry, at 28 weeks I did that. Also at 28 weeks, they of course check your blood pressure, they did the urine test, the weight, and then they measure your uterus. So at that week, my uterus actually ended up measuring way ahead of what it was supposed to. Oh, I forgot to show you guys, these are the ultrasound pictures from our anatomy. He actually looks like a baby at these. Anyway, so at 28 weeks, I ended up measuring 32 centimeters, which measuring a little bit ahead or a little bit behind is no big deal, but when you measure that far ahead or that far behind, that's when it becomes kind of a concern. So my OB does all of his own ultrasounds in-house, and he is an OB that's like, let's get this done and over with right now, you know, like, so he did not like how I was measuring, so he did end up doing another ultrasound. That is this one. He looks almost exactly the same. These were not that far apart, but yeah, 5:30. Yeah. So of course the anatomy one, I forgot to show you guys, but he actually does look like a baby. But, and then this is just that one. This one wasn't really to measure him per se. This one was more. This one was more to measure the fluids in my body. So you can have excess fluid in your uterus around baby, and right now that doesn't really cause an issue, but if the fluid does not equal out later, then that's when it becomes an issue. He was not super worried about it, but he just wanted to know at that time, and I did end up having extra fluid. 32 weeks, they did, of course, the P test, all that other jazz, and then they did end up measuring, all right, 32 weeks. Oh, yeah, at 32 weeks, I ended up having another ultrasound. That is this one. This one was more to measure baby because of the amount of fluid wasn't excessive enough to measure that far ahead. So the amount of fluid, let's say, was just extra amount of fluid was just enough to measure 2 weeks ahead. Then why am I measuring 4 weeks ahead? So we ended up doing another ultrasound 2 weeks or a month later at 32 weeks, and that are these. These are actually 3D. That was at the end, and he was so done with us poking at him. This one, he is trying to flip me off. Those are some 3D ones, and of course here, they were measuring baby at these, and baby ended up being perfectly fine and measuring right on time. So the OB wasn't really 100% sure on why I was measuring so far ahead the week before. It could have been from the sugar test or something else, but he was not worried about it, so I was not worried about it either. So after 32 weeks, at least at my OB's office, you end up going every 2 weeks instead of every month. So I ended up, instead of at 36 weeks, I ended up going at 34 weeks, which actually this is the appointment that kind of started everything like crazy happening. So I actually went in early for the appointment. My appointment was usually on the Wednesday, but I ended up going in on Tuesday because I felt off. I actually had started feeling off the Monday, the day before, so that Monday, but they were closed for Labor Day, I believe, for something. So I ended up calling in that Tuesday. I was already off work that morning, and I said, listen, I don't feel good. I feel like I've been hit by a bus. I told the receptionist, which they are both very, very, I love both of them. I said, I feel like I've been hit by a bus and something is wrong. And so when I said something is wrong, she said, when can you get here? And I said, I can get there in like 10 minutes. I am down the road. And she says, we'll see you when you get here. So I ended up going into the office. They ended up fitting me into their schedule. Worst case scenario, I would have just gone for my regular appointment the next day. So they ended up treating this appointment like a regular appointment. They checked my blood pressure, which actually was a little higher than normal. So I'm usually at like 125 as my top number, and that day I was at 135. She was kind of worried because I knew at my next appointment, which would have been 36 weeks, that we were going to do more testing, just as general testing. So she's like, I hope I didn't freak you out with that. I said, no, like I kind of researched to make sure like what's going to happen on my next appointment. So she took my blood pressure then later, and like she waited like 5 or 10 minutes, and it ended up being high again. So she's like, if you feel like something's off or your blood pressure is weird or you feel off, I want you to just go up to labor and delivery because you're starting to show higher than normal blood pressure. She's like, sometimes just at the end or closer to the end, the blood pressure can get a little bit higher. But she's like, just that needs to be something that's in the back of your mind. And I was like, okay, no big deal. So of course my urine test came back fine. They checked my weight, and because I was showing weird symptoms, I ended up getting my cervix checked, and that was the first time we did that. So pretty much what that is, if you guys don't know, when they check your cervix, pretty much your OB sticks his hand up there and he measures how much you have dilated and thinned out. At 34 weeks, I was actually already dilated to a 3, and I was already thinned to about 60%. He was not very happy learning those results, and he said, that's probably why you've been feeling this bad. Your body has been using all its energy to dilate, and you're dilating too soon. So he said, do you work today? And I said, yes. He said, I want you to call off work. I'm putting you on bed rest. And I said, okay. And he said, I also want you to go straight home, pack your bag if you haven't, and be prepared, because I'm pretty sure your baby's not going to make it to term. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, this is in the first appointment I had pretty much went to by myself. So I'm like, oh shit. Like, this is real. So I'm like, okay. So of course I go home, I chill on the couch, and I pack the bag and I get it ready. I call Ethan, telling him everything, what's up. I call my mom and I tell them what's up, and she said, and so then yeah, shit hit the fan. And depending on where you are, and depending on how far you are, the early stages of labor are when you dilate from a 0 to a 3. So I had already done the first part of labor, and then starting at a 4 is when you go into active labor. So my OB was worried that if I kept working, which I was working like 50 plus hours a week, if I kept working, I would put myself into the active stage of labor too early. So he said, pretty much, I'm putting you on bed rest. I don't want you to go into labor this early. So I'm like, okay, I'm preparing, you know. I am preparing myself mentally and physically. So then, instead of doing 2 weeks, he wanted to see me the next week. And he said, don't be afraid to go up there. Don't be afraid to call up there. Don't be afraid to do anything, because you are now high risk. You need, yeah. So I ended up going up in for my 35-week appointment, which was super, super fun. So my 35-week appointment, they checked everything, and then they checked my cervix. And after he had checked my cervix, I actually started to bleed a lot more than what he liked. My OB has a very, very dry sense of humor, and he tells you how it is, and that's what I really wanted in an OB, so that's why I suggest you find one that you like. And he tells you exactly how it is. So then he, of course, checked me, and when he was done, he's like, that's a lot more blood than what I like. And so I'm like, okay. And it was fresh blood. It was not like older blood. It was like I was bleeding. So I'm like, okay. So we clean me up pretty much, and he keeps me in his office for about another 30 minutes and does a non-stress test on the baby to make sure baby is okay. To make sure that there's no bleed through my, whatever that thing is called that connects you to baby. Oh my gosh, the pregnancy brain goes on through motherhood. The placenta, make sure there's not a bleed in the placenta or anything. I was still at a 3, and I thinned out just a little bit more, but not enough. So he kept me in his office, and then he pretty much told me again, you're not going to make it to term. So I'm like, oh shit. He's like, if you make it to 36 weeks, I will be happy. So I'm like, okay. That's when he did send me up to the hospital for more monitoring. Was that day because of the bleeding. So he sent me up there, and I was monitored up there for about 5 hours. The bleeding had stopped, and everything was good. And then they had, my OB had suggested I get steroid shots for his lungs, but they ended up not doing them. So 36 weeks happens. Everything is exactly the same as my 34-week appointment. So they just check everything. I'm still at a 3. I'm still thinned out, just, you know, about halfway. And everything is fine. And we're like, okay. He's like, I'm surprised you've made it this far, and I'm really happy you made it the extra 2 weeks. So I was like, I have been doing nothing around the house. So he essentially took me off of bed rest, but he did put me on limited pelvic movement. So I was able to get up and I was able to do things, but I still was not able to have sex. I wasn't able to like really exercise or go walking. He said just take everything really easy and just watch for bleeding or for you going into labor. But you're out of the NICU or guaranteed NICU range, which is what we were worried about, that my baby would be a NICU baby. Which you were not. So 36 weeks go off. Cool. 37 weeks happens. He's surprised I'm actually still there. He's surprised I made it to that appointment. So 37 weeks happens. We do, of course, everything normally. We also had another ultrasound at 37 weeks. And that one is when you start to not be able to see baby very well. This is the ultrasound from 37 weeks. I have this picture here. At this ultrasound, more shit hit the fan. So that week was really weird. The doctor was not in the office. He had an emergency C-section he had to go do for one of his patients, unfortunately. So they had planned on that ultrasound at my 36-week appointment. So then when we did the ultrasound, you know, I got the picture, and after that, you see the nurse and you do all your weight and everything, and she said the tech found something they didn't like. And I'm like, oh God, like, I'd been feeling him kick, you know, no bleeding, no whatever, but since we had been put on high risk and bed rest for a while, I was worried there was something physically wrong with him. She said, the nurse also said, I can't really tell you, like, logistics-wise, but your baby's head is measuring a lot further along than his body. And I was like, oh shit. So he's like, I want your OB to look at the ultrasound and, you know, and kind of see what he thinks. So I ended up calling the next day when he was in the office. I ended up going in, and he was telling me that baby's head was measuring like 2 to 3 weeks farther along than his body, growth-wise. And he had a big head. So that's when he sent me to the hospital to get another ultrasound done, because he was worried that sometimes a bigger head can mean that he is getting fluid in his brain, or that he just has a big head. So we ended up going to the hospital, getting another ultrasound done, and it ended up being fine. They said baby does have a big head, but nothing that we are worried about. So I'm like, okay, but baby has a big head. So that was my 37-week appointment. That was fun. 38 weeks happened. Of course, he's surprised I've still made it this far. I am in pain 24/7. This is when the pelvic pressure just went off, and it was just awful the entire time. It's pretty much the same as my 34-week appointment. They do all those tests. They measure everything. Everything's measuring fine. And we just leave. We leave and we're like, okay, peace, you know. Hopefully we don't see you next week, but, you know. Later that day, I get a call from my OB. And he says, I've made you an appointment with a specialist at Mercy, which is a hospital. I made you an appointment with a specialist. Can you get there in like 45 minutes? So I was like, yeah. I don't plan anything on the days I have an OB appointment, because I've had to go to the hospital a couple times to get monitored. And then if you've watched some of my secret pregnancy vlogs, after I've been checked, I've had to go up there for contractions. Oh gosh. So I go to that appointment. The lady looks at everything again. And that is this picture. This is when it starts to get very, very hard to see baby. Like, baby is so squished, you can barely see him. Yeah. So she measures everything, fluid, everything. She says, baby is measuring fine. We're not worried about his head being extremely large, to the point where I would point towards fluid buildup or anything, or a brain bleed. She said, we're not worried about that at this point. So, your baby has a big head. So I'm like, okay. And of course, at this point, like, I am so tired of being pregnant. I was told a month before then that I would have my baby at any time. I had actually, after my 35-week appointment, I had my bloody show later that day. And so I thought I was going to go into labor that day, and I ended up not, thank God. But it was scary. I also did have one at 36 weeks where my body, and this was actually scary too. So it was at 36 weeks, and my body, my entire, like, from pretty much my rib cage down, so my entire bump, tensed up like a Charlie horse. And it had been like that for hours. And I had tried taking a bath. I had tried taking some Tylenol. I tried everything. And I was worried these were contractions because I didn't really know what contractions felt like. And this was painful. But it never stopped. So after like an hour and a half to 2 hours of dealing with this, we go up to the hospital. They can't figure out what's happening. So they give me a muscle relaxer, and that worked. To at least stop the contractions. Does this light help too? Oh my God! Look, another light on. Actually, no, it's probably gonna wake him up. So that happened at 36 weeks. Everything was so weird. So yeah, 38 weeks, baby has a big head. So we're mentally preparing for baby to have a big head. 39 weeks happens. Of course, my OB walks into the door. He says, why do you not have baby yet? He's Oriental. And I laughed. I said, how about you ask him? And he laughed. So at that appointment, I was measuring actually at 4 centimeters. Ethan and I had started at 38 weeks. We were pretty much taken off of restricted pelvic, and we were told, now you can start to put yourself into labor naturally. So we had tried everything, and of course we did it for we had walked, ball, sex, everything, and nothing was working. So at 39 weeks, he measured me again. I was at 4 centimeters instead of 3. Woo! And that's when he talked to me about induction. And this is super weird, and this part of probably is not going to be the same for everybody or even close to it. So what it is with my OB, he runs his own private practice, and he can accept whatever insurance he wants to. So he accepts our insurance, which worked out really well. But he only has birthing rights at one hospital in my town. We have 2 hospitals here. And of course, the one that he has birthing rights to is not covered under in-network for my insurance. So I'm like, if I want him to deliver my baby, and I said, well, I'm probably not going to care anyways. I was not delivered by my OB, and my older sister was not either. So I'm not really going to care who's down there catching my baby. And everyone's like, no, you won't really. So because he did not have birthing rights at the hospital I was going to deliver at, he would have to get another OB in that network to sign off on an induction. Now, of course, he could not find an OB that would sign off on an induction until it was medically necessary, which at this point, even though I was at a 4, it was not medically necessary, and we would have to wait and have an induction date of the 27th of October, which is when I was 42 weeks. At 42 weeks, it becomes medically necessary for them to induce a pregnant woman because the placenta can actually stop working. And if your placenta stops working, it can end up killing your child. So, so he could not find an OB, and that's why he was getting me into these specialists, because we were hoping the specialist would be like, I need to induce you. You're already at 38 weeks, but he could not get another OB to induce me. So at my 39-week appointment, he said, you can call your insurance and see if they will accept your other hospital as in-network. Because after 40 weeks, he said, this is what I'm going to have you do. I'm going to have you come to my office once a week and get measured and everything. And then I'm going to have you go up to the hospital twice a week to get non-stress tests and to do all that. So that's essentially what the insurance would have to pay, would be 4 hospital visits and 2 more OB appointments. So they're like, we can try to tell the hospital that it's going to be, or the insurance, that it's going to be cheaper for them to accept his hospital as in-network. So I would not pay a buttload of money as in-network. As in-network, or if they don't want to and they want to wait for the other hospital, that they're going to have to pay for an additional 4 hospital visits and 2 OB appointments. So we worked it out with insurance to where they would accept his hospital as in-network. And I ended up getting induced at 40 weeks and 2 days. It was 2 days after my due date. I was actually supposed to be induced the day before that, but they didn't have any beds available, so they pushed me off, which I was really pissed at the time. I was actually super pissed, but I'm glad they did that because of what happened during my delivery. I'm glad they did that. So yeah, I ended up making it past term. We were all very happy I ended up making it past term. My OB was very happy. He was surprised, and the whole 9 yards. But anyways, that's all for this video. I know it's super, super long, but I hope you guys, learned something. I don't know. I learned a lot through this pregnancy journey, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. But yeah, so that's actually all I have for you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave them down below. And if you want to talk about anything that happened during your pregnancy or what is happening right now during your pregnancy, you can leave that down below as well. And like I said in my intro, of course, anything that is like vulgar or that puts people down, I will of course delete those and I will block them because I ain't dealing with that shit here. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video, which will be on Friday. So make sure you hit that bell icon and that subscribe button so you do not miss that. But thank you guys so much. Bye bye.